We are back. Someone asked for a part 2 of this, so let's begin.
It is now 5 p.m. and German artillery is pounding the Allied front line where Australian and British troops prepare for the charge. This artillery is supported by heavy machine guns, unsilenced during 6 hours of bombardment. Later, a 14th Brigade non-commissioned officer recalled,
"The first thing that struck you was that the shells were bursting everywhere, mostly high explosive. And you'd see machine guns knocking bits off the trees in front of the reserve line and sparking against the wire. When men looked over the top, they saw no man's land leaping up everywhere in showers of dust and sand, rather confirming our fears that the Germans knew something."
The next hour is a perfect demonstration of what is often called the fog of war, as plans and orders are overtaken by the tide of battle. At 5:10, Brigadier General Pompey Elliott receives a warning that the barbed wire surrounding the Sugarloaf in front of his brigade's position has been left uncut by the bombardment. Observers note 3 intact German machine gun emplacements. Adding to Elliott's problems, part of his force is not in position because of the ferocity of the German artillery. 5 minutes later, to the right of the Australians, British soldiers begin to leave doors called sally ports in the trenches and enter no man's land. The effect is very different to a line of soldiers going over the parapet. The small doorways naturally funnel the soldiers, causing congestion and making them an ideal target for German machine gunners who shoot them down as they try to fan out from these narrow exits. The effect is horrific as bodies pile up around the doorways. Elsewhere along the line, British and Australian soldiers begin a series of movements from the rear trenches to the forward line. So congested are the Australian trenches that many of these men need to go out over open ground to reach their starting point. They come under intense artillery and machine gun fire as they do so. The first wave of Australians goes over the parapet into no man's land just after 5:40 p.m. Throughout this first hour of the infantry attack, sheer chaos reigns as men charge, fall, or inch forward across no man's land under the storm of artillery and machine gun fire. By 6 p.m., British and Australian troops have in some sectors reached the German front line and are beginning to break into the trenches as Allied artillery lifts its range to target areas behind the enemy's front. It's 6 p.m. and the 4th wave of infantry is advancing. 2.5 hours of daylight remain. The Allied artillery barrage lifts its range to target the rear of the German line as successive waves of British and Australian troops advance against the enemy's frontline trenches and the salients. Major Jeff McRae, a Gallipoli veteran, leads the 4th wave of the 15th Australian Brigade, including the 59th and 60th Battalions, about 2,000 men, including 60 officers. His men include signallers with wire and telephones to keep headquarters informed of the battle's progress. 75 metres into no man's land, McRae is shot in the neck and killed. All McRae's signallers also fall dead or wounded. Messages now have to be carried back across no man's land by runners.
We're all going to end up in the rest camp at this rate.
Private Walter Jimmy Dowling of 57th Battalion is watching the attack unfold.
The 60th climbed onto the parapet, heavily laden, dragging with them scaling ladders, light bridges, picks, shovels, and bags of bombs. Scores of stammering German machine guns spluttered violently, drowning the noise of cannonade. The air was thick with bullets swishing in a flat lattice of death. There were gaps in the lines of men, wide ones, small ones. The survivors spread across the front, keeping the line straight. The bullets skimmed low from knee to groin, riddling the tumbling bodies before they touched the ground, but still the line kept on. Hundreds were mown down in the flicker of an eyelid like great rows of teeth knocked from a comb, but still the line went on, thinning and stretching. Wounded wriggled into shell holes or were hit again. Men were cut in two by streams of bullets, and still the line went on. It was the charge of the Light Brigade once more, but more terrible, more hopeless.
a mere 10 minutes have passed since 6 p.m. With parts of the German front-line trenches being captured by both British and Australian units, the soldiers press their attack and move on towards the German second line. 53rd Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Ignatius Norris arrives with battalion headquarters in the 4th wave, calling, "Come on lads, only another trench to take." As Norris moves forward, he's cut down by an unsuppressed machine gun. Norris's last words are reported to be, "Here, I'm done. Will somebody take my papers?" With him is Private Leslie Croft, a battalion signaller, who attempts unsuccessfully, with others, to bring his wounded leader back to safety. Others with Norris are also killed and wounded by German machine guns, including his young adjutant, 32-year-old Lieutenant Harry Moffat. According to Sergeant Patrick Lonergan, when he sees his colonel hit, Moffat instantly calls for 4 men to carry him back to the Australian lines. As he does so, he too is hit and falls dead across Norris's body. A little before 6:30, 53rd and 54th Battalion soldiers who are now occupying the German front line from Rougebank to near Delangre Farm press forward in an attempt to locate the key objective, the German second line. Some of these men have advanced further than 300 meters, but only find occasional enemy soldiers taking cover in shell craters, many of whom retreat on sight. The Australian soldiers are under orders to resist the chase. Instead, some Germans are taken prisoner and sent back to Australian lines.
It's not good oil, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel Toll, commanding the 31st Battalion, also looks for and is unable to find the German second line.
You bloody nut.
Toll later reported, "We swept on with the intention of capturing the 2nd and 3rd trenches in the 1st line system, but no trace could be found. It now appeared evident that the information supplied as to enemy defences was incorrect and misleading. The ground was flat, covered with fairly long grass. The trenches shown on aerial photos were nothing but ditches full of water." By 6:45, the Australian and British advance is stalled and turns into a retreat under fire from their own artillery as the guns continue to hit targets behind the enemy's front line, unaware of the progress of the infantry units. German artillery also begins to open up on no man's land, preventing other Allied units from advancing. By around 7:20, Brigadier General Elliott sends a report to headquarters that the attack is failing, in part because of a lack of support. In response, Major General Mackay sends about 500 men, half of the reserve 55th Battalion, into the battle. But as 8 p.m. approaches, the Germans are reoccupying much of their front line. The Allied attack is failing everywhere. The German record of battle reports, "The forward trench was once again in our hands. 47 unwounded and 14 wounded Englishmen were captured, as well as 7 machine guns and sundry material. A great number of wounded and dead English lay in front of our position. Bandages were ordered forward. The platoons which had been pushed out moved back into their positions. 2 captured machine guns were turned against the enemy."
I was laughing at that. I was laughing at something else.
It is now 8 p.m. Daylight begins to fade over the battlefield. At 11th Corps headquarters, General Haking orders a fresh assault to take place in an hour's time. Having received divisional reports on the progress of the battle so far, his intention is to support the limited successes where they can be found. Haking is under the misapprehension that the Sugarloaf salient has been dealt more damage than in fact it has. Plans are drawn up to launch an assault against it. But within half an hour, these plans are cancelled as aerial reconnaissance reveals the position to still be intact. Haking also receives news of the high number of casualties. He orders the 3 remaining British brigades to wait until morning before resuming the attack. Whilst the order to delay does eventually make its way to Mackay, Elliott, who's been preparing his reserves to assault the Sugarloaf, is never informed of the change in plan and continues to prepare for the assault. The headquarters of the Bavarian 6th Regiment are at the same time planning for a determined counterattack. Equipped with a more realistic assessment of the situation, their plans involve a combined artillery and infantry assault with clear lines of command and communication. At 9 p.m, Elliot orders the Australian 15th Brigade reinforcements to advance and assault the eastern face of the Sugarloaf, with 2 companies of the 58th Battalion and some survivors of the 59th.
Bloody got guts, that one.
They're led by 21-year-old Major Arthur Hutchinson. Rising from cover 200 metres from Sugarloaf, they're immediately met by machine gun fire from the emplacements ahead of them. The result is a slaughter. At the same time, fresh reserves of the Bavarian 6th Division gather at DeLongre Farm in large numbers in preparation for the counterattack. 8th Australian Brigade Headquarters receives reports that the 32nd Battalion is under great pressure. The front line cannot be held unless reinforcements are sent. Enemy machine gunners are creeping up. The artillery is not giving support. Sandbags required in thousands. Men bringing sandbags are being wounded in the back. Water urgently required. By 20 past midnight, Brigadier General Harold Pompey Elliott has learnt that the attack on the Sugarloaf has failed disastrously and relays the information to Mackay. A third attempt is now deemed impossible. Mackay's response is to order the attack abandoned and for the survivors to withdraw to their old positions and form a defensive line against an expected German counterattack. Over the next several hours, British and Australian soldiers will be pushed back to the Allied front line through the confusion and darkness. Captain Charles Arblaster and the remnants of the 53rd Battalion positioned behind the German frontline trenches come under attack from German units and contemplate retreat to their own front line, which is now dangerously far away. As Arblaster leads the retreat, his men are struck by a hail of German gunfire. Captain Arblaster is shot through both arms and falls wounded. He and other survivors make their way back to the German front line. They seek cover in a trench and are taken prisoner. At 5 p.m, the order for a general retreat is finally given by General Charles Munro, commander of the British First Army. But retreat is at least as perilous as attack, and many soldiers fall as they try to get back to the Allied line. Word of the retreat does not reach all units at the same time, and soldiers are still coming back as late as 8 o'clock in the morning, a good hour after German forces have recaptured much of their original frontline positions. Pockets of soldiers, such as those from the 53rd Battalion, are trapped in their forward positions, forced to surrender and become prisoners of war. The Australian 14th Brigade is one of the last units to receive the order to withdraw as German forces press their counterattack. 14th Brigade's retreat is assisted by the makeshift ditches and tunnels known as saps that have been dug by fellow soldiers through the night to assist in traversing no man's land. Just before 8 a.m, German forces launch another attack. As Sergeant Archibald Winter of the 55th Battalion recalled,
God knows which way he came, we don't. He appeared to come from every direction. We were unsupported, and consequently Fritz could come in on our own flanks.
What's the pillbox?
They had snipers everywhere, and our own men were falling fast.
Fucking hell, mate.
Then we got into close quarters with the bombs, but we were only a handful, and Fritz was there in his thousands.
14th Australian Brigade are the last men out and are ordered to hold the Germans back. Captain Norman Gibbons leads several assaults, with grenades brought out through the 14th Brigade's communication trench across no man's land.
Come on, you mad!
On receiving orders to retire, Captain Gibbons is one of the very last to go. Finding the trench blocked with the dead and wounded, he's forced to climb over the parapet. As he looks back on the German line, he's shot in the head. From the comparative safety of the British front-line trench, Corporal Williams observed,
West.
We were powerless to assist them and had to watch them being shot down at point-blank range. It seemed an eternity of time until the lucky ones reached our parapets to be pulled in by willing hands. No sooner was our field of fire clear than we blazed into the Germans who'd lined their parapets to punish the retiring troops.
At 9:20 a.m. on the 20th of July, the Bavarian 6th Division Command consider the battle won. An intelligence officer notes, the last of the British and Australians left defending themselves have been captured. By 20 past midnight, Brigadier General Harold Pompey Elliott has learnt that the attack on the Sugarloafers failed disastrously and relays the information to McCarthy.
I gently pressed restart. My bad.
Captain Frederick Collier, the regimental medical officer of the 60th Battalion, wrote, "We worked all that afternoon, that night, and all next day without ceasing. We could not show a light, and when we came to a wounded man, we'd ask him where he was hit and feel for his wound with hands covered with dried blood and mud. There was no time and no water to wash hands." Brigadier General Pompey Elliott went on a post-battle inspection accompanied by Lieutenant J.D. Schroeder, who reported,
Ordinary sandbag trenches were now heaps of debris, and it was impossible to walk far without falling over dead men. But Pompey went from battalion to company headquarters and so on, right along the line. A word for a wounded man here, a pat of approbation to a bleary-eyed digger there. He missed nobody. He never spoke a word all the way back to advanced brigade headquarters. But he went straight inside, put his head in his hands, and he sobbed his heart out.
Other survivors were struck by the intensity of his anguish. At one stage, Elliott called out to Captain Bill Traynor,
Good God, Bill, what's happened to my brigade?
Battle outcomes. No territory gained or lost. 5,500 Australians and 2,000 British troops killed or wounded.
That was the end. Thanks for watching.